I don't know.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Francisco. Hotchkiss. Here. House.
Here.
Self.
Here.
White. Here. Williams.
Here.
Mayor Schneider.
Here. I don't see any public comment slips for items not on the agenda, so we'll move right over to Mr. Samario.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. Bob Samario, Interim Finance Director. And we are here to continue our discussion and review of the fiscal year 2011 recommended budget. We're getting close to completing the department presentations. Today we have three departments spanning three different funds that will be discussed. We'll start with the solid waste fund, and then we'll follow with the airport and then waterfront. And just to remind you and the public that tomorrow evening, starting at 6 o'clock, we will be discussing the police department's budget, and then next week we'll wrap up with the fire department's budget. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Christy Schmidt, who is the Acting Environmental Services Manager, and she'll make the presentation for the Solid Waste Fund.
Thank you very much. Okay, so this is the Solid Waste Fund presentation for the recommended budget for 2011. Solid Waste has one program, which is Environmental Services. Environmental Services is one of 6 divisions in the Finance Department. The Environmental Services Division has been managed for the past couple of years by the Assistant Finance Director, and with the appointment of Mr. Samario as Interim Finance Director, I stepped in to provide support to Bob in managing the division in an acting capacity. Stephen McIntosh will be here shortly. He had something come up, but he is a key staff member and our resident expert in all things solid waste, and so he is also going to be here for questions during the presentation. The total finance department budget is almost $28 million, and of that, the solid waste fund alone represents 65% of the finance department budget at $18 million. But as you know, the vast majority of the monies collected in the solid waste fund are collected through monthly utility bills and that are sent to our ratepayers and are then remitted directly to the city's 2 refuse haulers, Marburg and Allied Waste. As you'll see later, we keep a relatively small portion of those monies to fund both city and regional solid waste programs through the Environmental Services Division. The mission of the Environmental Services Division is to provide reliable, cost-effective collection of residential and commercial recyclables, green waste, food scraps, and refuse through the city's franchised haulers, with a primary focus on maximizing diversion of solid waste from the landfill disposal. Staff in the division performs franchise contract management, oversees non-franchised collection, performs consumer rate analyses, ensures compliance with the various solid waste standards, laws, and codes, and educates the public and resolves the public's problems with their solid waste collection. A key responsibility of the division, of course, is also meeting or exceeding the diversion requirements of the California Integrated Waste Management Act and the goals established by City Council. And in the last year, the city recently met the council's goal of achieving a 70% diversion rate citywide by 2010, a year early. So the budget overview, we'll start with expenses. The total budget for the Solid Waste Fund and Environmental Services Division is $18,046,000. However, again, the major component of the Solid Waste Fund budget, at 86% of the total budget, is really a pass-through of consumer solid waste collection fees to the city's contracted haulers, Allied Waste in Zone 1 and Marburg in Zone 2. Salaries and benefits for the division make up 6% of the costs. Special projects make up 3%, and allocated costs and supplies and services are just 2% each. And the program has 10.5 FTEs. Comparing the fiscal year 2011 recommended budget with fiscal year 2010, salaries you'll see show an increase, but this is primarily because of a 5% unpaid furlough was included in the fiscal year 2010 budget and is not included in the recommended fiscal year 2011 budget. But if a furlough is negotiated for 2011, the increase will be much more modest at about 1.5%. We're predicting a very slight decrease in the amount that will be payable to the haulers due to reduced revenues from trash services and an adjustment related to traditional, the last couple years of payments due to them. We took reductions in almost all of our supplies and services line items, including office supplies, meeting and travel, postage, etc. A small increase of 2.3% overall in supplies and services is due to an increase in the division's allocation for utility billing equipment. Allocated costs, similar to other enterprise funds, are down 8.2%. And special projects are down 40.5% due primarily to the discontinuation of our pilot food scraps program, which is now part of our regular services, and the discontinuation of a special tipping fee that was being charged at Tehiquis to offset recycling revenues. And I'll talk a little bit more about special projects on the next slide. Finally, other costs are down by 64%, and this is primarily due to a decreased costs of maintaining equipment in the rights-of-way and a reduction in what we're proposing to put into appropriated reserves. A little bit more about our special project line items. The regional program fee has increased by $33,367 based on the increased billing from the county. The regional programs include hazardous waste and e-waste collection at the Community Hazardous Waste Center at UCSB. Staff has reviewed these increases with the county, and we agree that they're justified. $37,000 has been budgeted to reimburse the county for net losses under our recycling revenue sharing agreement. This is a new expense for us, as it's generally this agreement brings in revenue for us and doesn't cost us anything. However, as I'll go through more detail later, we expect this to be a one-time expense this year. The school recycling project has been increased by $5,000 due to increased support currently being provided to the schools in an effort to institute food scraps and recycling programs and help them reduce their trash bills, so we're going to spend a little bit more there. The Recycle at Work project is being reduced by $15,000 due to actual expenditures to sort of put it in line with what we're actually spending on a year-to-year basis on that program. The solid waste rate study was primarily budgeted in fiscal year 2010, but we've put $10,000 into that program for extra services that we may expect through that. What isn't shown here as far as special projects and is not budgeted at this point is the conversion technology project that we have going on. Although this is an ongoing project, nothing's been budgeted for this year. If we don't, because we're not sure of what expenses might come out of this, but if we do have additional funds that are needed, we would come to council for appropriation authority at that time. We have a hauler contract renewal coming up for Zone 1. That's the zone that's serviced by Allied Waste. But this will be the timelines and goals that we'll be developing over the next few months will tell us whether and how much we'll need to spend on that project. And so we would come at that time for additional appropriations there. And finally, environmental services and public works engineering are in the design review process, for a system to mitigate the release of methane from the old landfill at Elings Park through the installation of a gas extraction system there. And our current guesstimate is that that'll cost $450,000 to $650,000 to complete, and the work will be done in the off-peak season in the fall. We still don't know what the cost of the project would be, so we haven't budgeted it in fiscal year 2011, but we anticipate once we know what that cost will be, we'll bring the project to council early next year for bid award and then for appropriation authority, and that would be funded from reserves. We do think that we will be eligible to get a state grant that would reimburse up to 50% of the project costs, so that should be coming through separately from these special projects. Okay, on to revenues. The biggest source of revenues, again, in this fund is the franchise consumer solid waste fees. Again, this is mostly a pass-through to the franchised haulers. We also receive a 4% city program fee based on solid waste rates and a 3.24% fee for regional programs, regional solid waste programs. These account for 4% and 3% of revenues, respectively. An important change, you can see recycling revenues and franchise fees there are both at zero. This is an important change. We don't expect any revenues from recycling revenue sharing agreement this year or from solid waste franchise fees. And together these losses are $1.3 million to the solid waste fund this year. On the recyclables end, the net revenues generated from the county's handling of the transportation of the city's mixed recyclables in carts and cans to the Gold Coast Materials Recovery Facility in Ventura, we get a portion of those revenues. There's a 2-year delay in reimbursement of those revenues. So the revenues we receive in 2011 are based on fiscal year 2009 recyclables. And revenues will decrease this year by, $871,649. So it's a big decrease for us, and in fact, we'll owe the county $37,000, as I discussed in the costs for this line item, and that was due to the global economic downturn in October of 2008, which reduced the market for recyclable materials. However, we'll show you in a minute, we expect to see some recovery in that revenue line item, and so we don't expect to we do expect to see it start to recover in fiscal year 2012. So this is probably at least partially a short-term problem. And then, Fran?
May I ask you a question? In the past, have we made some pretty good money off the recycling program?
Oh, yes. In fiscal year 2010, we made $871,000, almost $1 million off of that. So
that's pretty good money.
Yeah. And we'll show, we do expect for that to recover a little bit in fiscal year 2012. We're expecting somewhere from between $150,000 to $170,000 in revenues from that. But this year is just a bad year because of that 2008 dive in the recyclables market. So the other line item we won't be expecting anymore are franchise fees. Franchise fees are assessed on the haulers when they're collected based on their use of the public rights of way, and they've traditionally been used to fund solid waste programs in the solid waste fund. And in fiscal year 2010, Council approved transferring those franchise fees to the general fund as part of mid-cycle adjustments. And so this will result in a revenue reduction of $440,248 to the solid waste fund as compared to 2010. So those are our big changes in revenues. And overall, our revenues are expected to decrease. Of course, other than the loss of the recycling revenues and the franchise fees, which I explained in the last slide, there are several other notable changes. Solid waste fees are expected to increase by approximately $214,000 due to a net effect of both lower than expected receipts due to, we think, the economic downturn, and then a rate increase of 2.9, which is planned for July 2010. Rate-related fees for the regional program fee and the city program fee will also increase by 1.4%. Going down to reimbursements, the haulers are required to reimburse the city for 80% of the incremental costs of our public education program. And for fiscal year 2010, the budget included $156,800 based on a public education budget of $196,000. For 2011, this has been decreased to $141,600 based on a public education budget of $177,000. We reduced the line item for e-waste revenues based on what we're actually seeing at our e-waste events this year. And finally, other revenues are are increasing based on expected donations to our single-use bag campaign, the Where's Your Bag campaign, and also due to revenues from administrative citations primarily.
Where do we get revenues from for Looking Good Santa Barbara? How does that a revenue? It says the $80,000 there?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, Council, both Marburg and Allied Waste Industries contribute
They contribute to it.
$40,000 to the solid waste fund every year. It's a fixed number.
Okay,
for
for that
$80,000.
purpose. Okay,
Correct.
got it, got it.
Okay. So we are, oh, let me go back here. Sorry. We are projecting to need to use reserves of $534,222 next year to balance the budget. That's been necessitated by the transfer of the franchise fees, which was $440,000 to the general fund, and then reduced recycling revenue. We don't expect this to be a long-term, ongoing structural deficit. However, we expect that we'll have salary savings in fiscal year 2011, both due to unfilled budgeted positions and also from a possible unpaid employee furlough if that's continued into next year. That should mitigate the need to use those those reserves. In addition, we should be back to a balanced budget in fiscal year 2012, both due to the recovery of recycling revenues and adjustments to expenses. And finally, in 2012, we actually expect to be able to replenish some of this use of reserves with a one-time payment of $237,000 we expect from the county. This was a reimbursement to the city of a $4 recycling surcharge, which was being charged to the haulers at Teaguas, and which we've already reimbursed to the haulers in 2010. But because of the delay in payments from the county, we will see that payment come to us in 2012, fiscal year 2012. So we'll be able to put some of that reserve money back, we expect. Just to give a little bit more detail on the mixed recyclables trend, and Stephen McIntosh is here, as you can see, and he put this really neat chart together and shows you that over the last 12 years there's been a steady increase in the value of mixed recyclables. But you can see where in October 2008 there was a big dive in the value of those recyclables, way down, and that they've steadily been recovering, however, and that we should see next year we should go above the baseline and see some revenues coming back to us. And again, we expect between $150,000 and $170,000 in revenues, hopefully in 2012, based on this trend. Anything you want to add about that, Stephen? Okay. Okay, some of the budgeting highlights from next year, some of our key projects and initiatives. The first is the continuation of the conversion technology project. We sent out an RFP, the county sent out an RFP in November of 2009. Responses are due back now in June 2010. We've had a couple of extensions to that deadline. We will then evaluate the bids against the set criteria that were set by the committee, the multi-jurisdictional solid waste task group who's working on this project, and then selected both a technology, there are several technologies we expect to bid, and a vendor. We're also continuing to work with the county and with the other participating agencies to redefine the roles and responsibilities of all of us in this project, because it is such an enormous project. And we're working on that with the CT subgroup of the Municipal Solid Waste Task Group, which are the staff and elected officials from the county, the city of Santa Barbara, Goleta, Solvang, and Bilton. So that's conversion technology. We'll also be installing a gas extraction system at Elings Park. We need to do that in order to mitigate emissions, primarily of methane, at 3 of the 15 wells at the landfill there underneath the park. So we've been coordinating with the Elings Park Foundation to minimize the disruption to the park as this is going on. We do expect the construction to begin in late fall 2010, approximately November. We're in the design review process now, and as I said, we're going to probably be coming back to you for project approval and appropriations approval in the next several months. We're going to continue with our single-use bag campaign, continue the voluntary program, which is primarily education and support to the stores in reducing the use of single-use bags. We're also going to consider a mandatory education program via ordinance, kind of putting some teeth into what we're already doing as a voluntary program, probably if we don't go another way, which would be a tax on bags. But we'll be bringing that back to you in July. But probably if we don't go there, we would be going toward an ordinance of some sort. We're also going to be completing our residential rate study. We're going to be looking at new incentives for diversion and creating a rate structure that incentivizes people to recycle and do other forms of diversion. And also be looking at possibly establishing rates for food scraps for the residential sector if that's the way council decides to go. Finally, we have a very big project coming up that we're going to be just in the starting phases of. The franchise for Zone 1, that's the zone that's serviced by Allied Waste, it will expire in June of 2013. And so over the next year, we'll be establishing timelines and goals, working with the Sustainability/Solid Waste Committee and with the full council. And then we'll begin to develop an RFP for that process, and that'll be a several-year process, which will end with a new and improved, hopefully, franchise agreement for that zone. Moving on to the rate increases. Let's see here. Rates are for solid waste. Rates are largely controlled by agreements with the two franchise haulers, where we need to increase our revenues to them. There are two components to the solid waste rates and the pass-through to haulers, the related pass-through to haulers. One is collection. That's the cost of collecting the trash. That's adjusted by the CPI annually. And then disposal, the cost to go and tip those that trash at the Tahiguas landfill, and that's based on the tipping fee, which is a pass-through, a direct pass-through to the ratepayers. Again, collection charges are 65% of the total costs of the system, and that's adjusted annually by the CPI. So what we do is we look at the January to January CPI, which for 2010 was 2.276%. And then we do 65% of that based on 65% of the cost of the system being collection, so that the total rate increase related to collection is 1.5%. And then we look at, for disposal, we look at the tipping fee increase of $4 per ton. That'll increase in July 1, 2010, generate additional costs to the system of $210,160 spread across the trash rates. That's about a 1.4% increase. So the net increase would be 2.9%, which is a factor of those two things. There are a few minor revenue neutral adjustments in there, but that's really where the overall rate increase comes from. And again, those are reflected in our contract with the haulers. We need to increase our payments to the haulers by that amount under our franchise agreements. And so that's where it went. Oh, yes, and we've shown those. Yesterday we presented those to the Finance Committee. The Finance Committee didn't have a recommendation on those, but we did do a presentation to the Finance Committee. Okay. Finally, just some of our key performance objectives, and a lot of these are related already to things I've already discussed. One is to conduct a rate study for the single-family residential sectors to increase financial incentives for diversion by March 2011, to install and commission a gas collection and control system at the closed landfill at Ealings Park by March 2011, to develop a timeline and plan for selecting a hauler for Collection Zone 1 in 2013, and to work with the Santa Barbara School District Recycling Committee to achieve district-wide diversion of 60% by June 2011. And that concludes my presentation, and I and Mr. Samario and Mr. McIntosh are all here and can answer any questions that you have.
Great. Mr. Williams.
First, I just want to ask, how many businesses are now participating in our commercial composting program, and how can a new business participate, and how much money are some of these businesses saving by participating in this commercial composting program?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Williams, as of yesterday, there were 90 businesses in the food scraps program. Our P3 for the year, the balance of the fiscal year anyhow, through June 30th was 71 businesses. So we've already gone past that target by 19. We're thinking by the end of June we'll have closer to 100 or 105. The average savings per business that's signed up for food scraps and is diverting this material from the landfill is about $500 a month. And if somebody else wants to sign up, they can call our main line. That's 564-5631. Or they can just get on our website, sbrecycles.org, and find our contact information, email us or call us, or go through City Hall and they can forward a call to us.
So if business owners are watching out there, they can help save the environment and save at least $500 by giving you a phone call and participating in this program.
That's exactly right. And what this new rate structure did is align the interests of the city and the haulers and the business community. We're getting environmental benefits. The business community is getting economic benefits. It's a perfect match.
And the second question is on the proposed rate increase. Unless we cut some of these programs, most of which are going in place to actually figure out how to save folks money on their rates, then we wouldn't, unless we're going to cut those very programs that could save people money on their rates, then we wouldn't be able to avoid having to incur this fee increase, correct?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Williams, that's correct. Again, we need to emphasize that the rate increases are really contractually obligated. We really don't have any obligation. We do have some discretion, I guess, in how we fund those increases, and we could cut programs, other programs. We can use reserves, which are now limited based on some of the shifts we've just talked about, or other cuts. But the rate increases themselves, we really can't avoid.
Well, as chair of the Finance Committee, I did want to report that we did hear this yesterday. There were 2 members present. I, of course, believe that it is internally consistent that if we all, as a Finance Committee, supported transferring franchise fees over to the general fund, thereby saving the general fund considerable amount of money, and we don't want to cut any of these new programs that are going to save us all money, both the city and users, then the only alternative is to enact the required fee increase. And so, and you got to put it into perspective that if we're changing rates so that everyone can save money if they shift towards recycling more, then this is a fee increase that actually is going to end up saving a whole lot of people more money in the long run, because we'll be able to enact rate systems that reward people for recycling. And I also just want to give people some of the background and thank former Councilmember Barnwell for really pushing this hard on the Solid Waste Committee. When he got there, he looked at the numbers and he looked around and he said, "You mean we don't actually reward people for, having less trash?" And we looked at it, we scratched our heads, we looked at them, and we said, well, actually, really, we don't. We don't really have a very rational system that enables people that move more over towards recyclables to pay less, even though we pay less. In fact, with recyclables, we make money. So we should be incentivizing people out there to recycle more because it saves us all the money. And I think that the staff recommendation is part of that move.
Thank you, Mr. Hotchkiss.
Could you tell me a little bit about the conversion technology you spoke of?
Yeah, I don't think we've had an update with this council this year, so.
That's correct, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hotchkiss. Before I get into some of the details, we will be coming back to council within the next few months. As Ms. Schmidt indicated, We are expecting to receive proposals in June from the vendors, and at that point, we're going to be come back to council and giving them an update of where we're at, and just grounding everybody, particularly those new folks who haven't really been involved in the discussions, to let them know where we're at, what the issues are, why are we even looking at this. But with that, just really quickly, the conversion technology project really stems from the fact that we are running out of capacity at our landfill, or the regional landfill managed and operated by the county. Their expected capacity it will end in somewhere around 2023. And so this has been an issue for a while. That we've known this for a while. And so I think the county and the city are together looking, along with Goleta and other communities, at ways to sort of expand or extend the life of that facility. And one of the ways to do that, in addition to recycling programs, which have some practical limits eventually, is to potentially implement a facility that could take the trash and essentially convert energy from it and divert a large portion of that material from the landfill. And it can range anywhere from 60% to virtually 100% of the material being diverted from the landfill, with the byproduct being some kind of energy source, probably electricity.
Great. Thanks very much.
Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, some of my questions go beyond the budget to just not knowing very much about the system. So, and if there's something coming on the horizon, then perhaps you can, or maybe something can then be created on the horizon. But first of all, did I understand from an earlier slide, or at least maybe it was a comment that accompanied the slide, that currently the city diverts 50% of our waste to recyclables? Was that the number that was put out there?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember White, we're at 70% diversion, just over 70% diversion as a whole. The residential sector is at 55% diversion. Commercial sector is somewhere in the 15 to 20% range. But as the entire jurisdiction, the city of Santa Barbara diverts just over 70% diversion, or 70% of its materials.
What was the comment? Let's see, the diversion rate of 60%.
The school district.
The school district has gone from 27% in 2005 to 50% as of last week. We've brought a couple of schools on to the Food Scraps program just in the last week, so that number is even higher now.
Okay. And then I was asking, one of my questions is about the Tehiguis. Is there a move afoot to look for another landfill? I know that there was a decade ago or something like that. Is that something that's happening out there at this point?
And where would you put it?
Madam Mayor, Councilman White, I don't believe that's the case.
Whose backyard, right?
Right.
And I want to emphasize that when I mentioned the 2023 kind of capacity limit, that's based on permitted capacity. There is sufficient space for a lot more years, but it would require to be permitted and go through that environmental process and the public process. But I don't know that they've been talking about another site. I think there is a suitable site. It's just a matter of getting it permitted, but the space is there.
Okay. And then I had received a comment from a county colleague that our system has had a glitch on meeting our recycling objectives. Has this system been operating smoothly the last couple of years, and everything was on target, or are we having concerns with it at this point?
Yeah, Madam Mayor, Councilmember White, I don't know what that person at the county was referring to. As far as I know and can see, all of the systems we have in place between infrastructure and collection and sorting facilities, it's all running smoothly.
Mr. Williams, did you want to?
Yeah, I might actually have an answer to that. I don't know if what he was referring to, but it's possible that he was referring to tonnage. And if we're measuring ourselves by the amount that we're diverting, we're doing extremely well. If you measure by how much we've actually reduced the tonnage going into Tehiguis, we're not doing that well. And the reason is because as our recycling has gone up as a society, so much has, by nearly the same rate, has the amount of stuff that we're throwing away. So the amount of stuff we're buying and throwing away has matched our recycling habits
nearly identically. I think more recently we're finally seeing a little bit of a dip in tonnage, probably attributable to the recession. But if we're going to actually reduce the tonnage going into Teagas, we have to do a whole lot more.
Is that what you meant?
It's as I say, I'm vague enough on it, and I'm learning, and that's why I'm just tossing out questions, and now I'm getting educated. So thank you for that. I have one other question, which Mr. Williams raised, or on a point that Mr. Williams raised, and that is transferring funds to the general fund. What is that about?
Sure.
I didn't understand that.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember White, actually this year, as part of the overall balancing of the general fund, we came to council several times in November, February, and more recently we came up with some ideas of how we can reclose what we estimated to be the remaining gap this year. And one of those suggestions was to transfer franchise fees that have been collected since 2003 into the solid waste fund, to transfer those prospectively starting this current fiscal year to the general fund. And franchise fees are traditionally a general fund revenue. They're designed to reimburse or compensate the city for the use of the public right-of-way by the various franchises.
Right, okay.
And we have that for various franchisees, whether it be cable or gas or whatever that might be. And so solid waste, the haulers were paying a franchise fee, and it totaled about $440,000. And this year we now shifted it over. So that means we will no longer be collecting that in our solid waste fund, and it will be an ongoing revenue source for the general fund, which is it's a good thing. We're going to have to deal with that in the solid waste fund, but it's a good thing for the general fund.
I see. Okay, and is that one of the main reasons why the rates would need to go up is because of that?
Well, I'm not sure we're talking about rate increases. The rate increases that we were just describing are strictly contractual, and they're really designed to reimburse the haulers for their general increases in cost to provide those services. Again, it's based on a CPI broken down between collection and disposal. So how we deal with the loss of the franchise fees and this short-term loss of recycling revenues, we're going to have to evaluate. Ms. Schmidt indicated that we expect that recycling revenues will start to recover in 2012, and we may sort of find a way to be getting rebalanced in the next several years just by virtue of that. We're not suggesting at this point any additional fee increases to cover those losses, but we're going to evaluate that over the next year or so.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, and I do remember that conversation about the franchise. I just didn't move it over to trash. Thank you.
Ms. Self?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a few questions. You have 10.5 FTEs. Are there any vacant positions now?
Councilmember Self, Madam Mayor, yes, there is one vacant position at this point, and that is we have a environmental services manager position that is vacant.
Is that reflected in the budget as far as salaries and such, or is that person still included in the salary amount?
That position is funded in the environmental services budget. That is one of the places where we would be expected to be seeing some salary savings that we would use to potentially not need to go into our reserves as deeply as we're budgeting.
Ballpark, do you know how much that position would be with benefits?
$137,000 approximately.
I'm sitting in the wrong chair.
Keep in mind, by the way, just want to add that part of those funds are what's covering allocating part of Chrissy Schmidt's time into that fund.
No, I understand that. And then you indicated there we were going to have lower reserves because?
Yeah, that is correct, Madam Mayor, Councilmember Self. We are expecting to use reserves next year for several reasons. One is to fund the project that was described at Edenings Park, the gas extraction system. Mm-hmm. We're expecting that to be anywhere in the neighborhood of $400,000 to $600,000, which would be funded from reserves. We are also expecting and budgeting the use of about $500,000 in reserves to respond to the $871,000 shift in recycling revenues. So we're going from getting money to paying for that, as well as the shift or the loss of franchise fees. Again, as we talked about, we offset some of those revenue losses through cost decreases, but the net impact of all that is that we will be needing to use reserves next year on a one-time basis as we transition to a sort of rebalancing of about $500,000. So that's why we're going to see eventually about $1 million decline in our reserve balances, which are currently about $1.6 million.
When you say reserves, do you mean reserves above policy, or, I mean, what are the, I'm sorry to interrupt,
No,
but it
that's-
just related to that.
Yeah,
I mean, you have, what are the total reserves,
Yeah,
and do we
sure.
have enough, and are you talking above policy reserves, or
Well,
what's the bigger picture here?
Madam Mayor, it's all actually one and the same. We don't have any policy reserves in the solid waste fund. The reserves we have are essentially all above policy. What we do try to maintain, just like we do in our street sweeping fund, a certain amount of operating reserves, and we always sort of target 10 to 20%. So we'd like to maintain about somewhere around $200,000 in there just for as an operating cushion, just because of variability in revenues and costs. So, of the $1.6 million, I would like to think that we'd want to keep about $200,000. Again, we're going to be using a fair amount next year with a combination of the gas extraction system and what I just described, the loss of revenues. And then there's also some discussion in the Finance Committee is wanting us to look at a potential payback strategy for the franchise fees that have been collected since 2003 in that fund to repay to the general fund. So, we're looking at depleting our reserves fairly quickly. Again, I'd like to maintain some so we can find a way how we deal with this loss of revenues over the next several years. But again, there's no policy reserves like we have in the general fund or in the water fund of 10%, 15% in capital. We just don't have that.
What was the number right now? How much?
Currently, about $1.6 million is what we expect to have. We had at the beginning of this fiscal year.
Okay, 1.6, okay. Did you want to mention?
Yeah, it's just we set this fund up in 2003. Initially, we just collected money from the ratepayers, and we just sent that money to haulers. And we said we wanted to account for it separately. It was an off-budget transaction. The money came in, the money went out, and it didn't even go through the city's budgets. And when we set up the recycling program, we said we need to have a little money to start doing the recycling, and we also were recognizing that we had a potential liability at the Las Positas dump for post-closure costs. But if you think about this fund, what's different than like the waterfront fund or the water fund or the wastewater fund is that 90% of the money comes in and goes out to the haulers. And it's a relatively small budget then for the recycling activities and then, of course, the post-closure costs. The good news is that a couple years ago, we thought that the cost for the Ealing's Park could have been well over $1 million, and now it's coming down. It's still going to be significant, that's why we were building up that fund balance. But now that cost us, I think it's run $700,000-800,000, and we thought it was going to be could have been $1.5 million, and so that's what we were building those reserves up for.
Did you have other? Go ahead.
Yeah. What is the Recycle at Work program?
Madam Mayor, Council Member Self, the program consists of several different approaches to helping a business get recycling or green waste or food scraps diversion happening at their place of business. We have 3.5 employees dedicated to that. That includes the food scraps program. But what we'll do, or what my staff does, is go into a business at their request normally and do a quick waste assessment, essentially look around the business and see how many containers they have where, if they have any recycling containers next to any of their trash. Look in the dumpsters in the back of the business to see what size of trash, recycling, and green or food waste they might have. See if there's any contamination in those containers. See if there's actual potential. If a trash container, a 4-yard dumpster, is 90% cardboard, well, that raises a flag, and they make a note of that, and that'll become part of the proposal at the back end. So it's a waste assessment, and then developing an economic proposal for the business where they take the current service levels and modify them, essentially decreasing trash service, which is now more expensive, and increasing recycling food scraps or green waste, which is significantly less expensive. Putting that economic proposal together, providing that to the manager or the owner of the business, saying you can save $500 a month by doing X, Y, Z. If the business owner decides, yes, we're going to move forward with this, then staff trainings follow that, where we'll come in and conduct 3, 4, 5 staff trainings, whatever it might be. For example, the Fess Parker Doubletree, they just started food scraps right before the State of the City address, and there were 6 or 7 trainings for all the different chefs and sous chefs and staff that run the kitchen there. And then it also consists of containers indoors. We provide little desk side containers or the narrow Slim Jims, they're 22-gallon Slim Jims. All the stickers or signage that's necessary to let people know what's recyclable or what's compostable in these different containers. And then we actually interface with the haulers. We call and request the service changes. We choose a date and say next Monday we're going to pull the trigger here. All the staff are trained. We have all the materials in place, so on and so forth. That's the Recycle at Work program.
Okay. The mention that you get $80,000 in revenue for Santa Barbara Beautiful. How much does the program cost the city?
Madam Mayor, Council Member Self, $80,000 was the original number when we instituted the recycling program fee, the 4% that Christy was talking about earlier. And part of that adjustment or amendment to the contracts was also the $80,000 from the haulers for Looking Good Santa Barbara. And by the way, Santa Barbara Beautiful plants trees primarily. They're really about the beautification and more the nature side of improving the aesthetics of the city. Looking Good Santa Barbara focuses more on recycling efforts and graffiti and litter removal.
Santa Barbara, that's what I mean.
It's a confusion that I always try to clear up whenever that comes out there. Anyhow, the Looking Good Santa Barbara program is run by Lorraine Cruz Carpenter. She's an environmental specialist. Her pay is somewhere around $75,000, $80,000 a year. The program itself probably costs that much or a little bit more, but she also does other programs like the Where's Your Bag campaign. She's been coordinating that for us.
Yeah. Years ago, I went and received a framed certificate and a T-shirt, and I thought, I'm never going back. This is so contrary to the concept, big plastic frame and certificate all color painted, and I think you do it because you believe in it, and I'm still doing it. I'm still walking and picking up trash, but I don't want the program spending money giving me a lunch and whatever. So I think that might be something to be considered, because I don't think people are necessarily doing it for the recognition, and if they feel it's important, a little rolled diploma with a ribbon on it would be, it seems that's just a suggestion for that. So, okay. And then do we see places for reductions in other staff, seeing as that is a big part of our costs here?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember herself, we are in the middle of developing and implementing a number of programs. The Food Scraps program was new this year. We're considering looking at maybe rolling that out in the residential sectors, both single family and multi-unit. So I still think we're kind of in the development stage. Our staffing levels are based on what we're doing today and the next few years. I think it's fair to say that eventually we're going to reach a point where we're going to be in a maintenance mode. And so we may want to look at staffing at that point, whether through attrition or another means. But I'm not sure on an ongoing basis, starting in the next few years, we're going to need 10.5 FTEs indefinitely. I think we'll be looking at staff at that point. But I think we're still kind of working on a number of projects that we want to get off the ground, and it may be a couple of years before we can do that.
I do remember one last question. We talk about incentives for diversion. That means raising trash rates in hopes that you recycle. I don't even fill up a trash can. So I have no incentive. I only have the stick and no carrot.
Right. Madam Mayor, Councilmember Self, at the Finance Committee, we kind of talked about that because we had the same dilemma when we evaluated the rates and did the study in the business sector. And how do we deal with those businesses that are very small and really don't have a lot of opportunity to take advantage of the cheaper containers because there's not much there. And so when we adjusted the rates, we've sort of left the rates alone for the smaller businesses. We really started adjusting the rates to reflect more of a savings in the recycling containers and an additional charge on the trash container for the bigger businesses and of course the very large businesses for that very reason. And I think as we roll that out in other sectors, we'll have to look at that same thing because we want to make sure people have the ability to save money and not just penalize them in order to create some incentives that they really can capitalize on.
Thank you.
Mr. House?
Oh, just a couple things real quick on to a couple of those points you were mentioning. 3.5 FTE to do that's the composting and the diversion, the Recycle at Work program and those kinds of things. Is that about it there? Okay. And then what I want to understand a little bit here, because we're going to be looking for where there might be cuts or where there might, if something's not truly essential to the city. What's the mutual benefit? I mean, on one hand, it appears that we're generating savings. I know the business community likes it now. They were very skeptical at the beginning, but they've come on board, and now you have 100 participants in the composting program. It's growing and growing because they can see that benefits them, and it's a good thing. Where's the other side of that equation for us in the city? I mean, we have these goals that are environmental. Is there a financial side to the benefit for the city, or is it really having to do with this big issue, the big mega issue, which has to do with refilling Tahigas, and we need to stretch that out as long as we can because of the enormous cost to take that next step? Take just a minute with me on that sort of economic equation and why we're investing 3.5 FTE in this.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, the 2005 strategic plan stated that we were going to hit 70%, or we'd strive to hit 70% diversion by 2010, and our interpretation was the end of this year. We got there by December of last year. We beat it by a year. The plan also said, though, to maximize diversion from the landfill. We're not going to stop there. We're going to go as far as we possibly can. And with the most recent information, scientific information that we have about greenhouse gas emissions, food scraps are essential to get out of the landfill because of the rate that they decompose within 90 to 100 days. Methane's being generated in landfills because of food scraps at an incredible rate. So the actual economics for the city of Santa Barbara, I think, boils down to, or is just limited to, the fact that we're extending the life of Tahigas. That's the economic side. The environmental benefits of what we're doing are the primary, I think, and most compelling part of the equation.
Okay, strong environmental piece because of sort of the ethic of the city and where we want to go as a city, and we've declared that as policy. There is an economic side as well, which has to do with, in 2005 we said that because why? Because when we're filled up at Tahigas, it's going to cost us a tremendous amount to do it. What's the...
Madam Mayor, Councilmember House, I was actually at the county as a senior analyst or specialist for them at the time that the landfill siting study was going on. I was the person in charge of coordinating that project. It was very interesting. But we had 450 or so potential sites that we were talking about, and then we identified 52 more feasible sites, and we put them on a map. And all of those property owners and adjacent property owners got notices. And it was not a pleasant process from that point forward, as you can imagine. So the fact that Tahigas is running out of permitted capacity by 2023, the longer we can avoid having to go through a landfill siting study again, or the longer the county can avoid having to do a new CEQA document or CEQA process to re-permit that facility and add another 15 or 20 years of permitted capacity. That, as you know, would be in the neighborhood of $3 to $4 million, I'm guessing. So it's avoided cost.
Okay.
If I could, burying trash is the most expensive thing we can do with our material that we collect. So it's, from the strict economic perspective, we're paying about $64, next year maybe almost $70 a ton to bury trash, which not only has the impact of reducing the capacity, but there's a cost associated with not just burying, but then eventually closing that facility and monitoring for 20, 30 years as required by state law, federal state law. So the cost isn't just $65 or $70 a ton. It's much more than that are kind of hidden costs that we're all going to be part of paying. So to the extent we can recycle material, we can actually make money off of that. To the extent we can compost food scraps, we of course have the environmental benefits of that, but it saves money because it only costs us $55 to process that. So ultimately it's economical for the ratepayer to do that, not only just good for the environment. So the economics are really easy to sort of figure out that it's so expensive to bury trash for a number of reasons, and to the extent you can avoid that, you can either make money or avoid costs, but in the long run, it does benefit the ratepayer and it does help the environment.
Well, thank you very much. So the lost opportunity, if we didn't do it, of some of the funds that we could generate, then with the conversion technology that we're talking about, is there an opportunity there in terms of energy, or where's that go?
Yeah, I think that the conversion technology project is a different sort of conversation because it's going to be a fairly expensive proposition, and I think that the thinking on that project is that if we run out of capacity of the landfill and we can't permit any more area, the cost of the alternatives will be much more than what we're paying now, because whether we have to ship it, rail it, send it somewhere else, is going to be very expensive. So it's sort of recognizing on a long-term basis, 20 to 30 years, what's going to be the cost of dealing with trash if we run out of space or we can't permit more space at the landfill. So conversion technology represents a reasonable alternative and a relatively inexpensive when you compare it to just burying stuff. It's still much more expensive than recycling material, and it still has its own environmental concerns, but it is a good alternative if you assume that there's some practical limit to how much you can actually divert or recycle, get people to divert from the trash. There's going to always be something left over from your trash container. It's just not recyclable. It's just going to have to be dealt with, and that's what the conversion technology is designed to capture. What do you do with the rest and having to avoid burying that, and maybe taking that portion and converting it into some energy source, and still again avoiding burying that material.
Very great answer. Thank you very much. The construction waste over there that Marburg's been recycling, and they're doing a pretty tremendous job. That's not included in any of this, is it? What we've been discussing, or that's like on its own separate track completely from this, from the fees and all the stuff that we've been discussing here with our solid waste, or is that blended in?
Madam Mayor, Council Member House, that's actually part of our diversion calculations. The cost to go to the C&D Recycling Center run by Marburg, that's not a part of the numbers, to the best of my knowledge.
Okay, thank you.
I'm glad you brought up I'm glad the Finance Committee brought up the past reserves from 2003, because I was going to ask about that. And if there was 6 years of money that could have gone to the general fund, then where is it, and can we have some? So that's, I think, a question. And maybe the answer is, we spent it on other things because we thought it was in the Environmental Services Division, and it went to good things because you do good work. So, but I definitely want to look into that in a little more detail. I'll also say I was just at Santa Barbara Junior High last week at a Renaissance fair, and I had to wait for the principal outside his office like a junior high school student. And but right there in front of all the trophies was the recycled glass award from Looking Good Santa Barbara from the luncheon from last year, and they're very proud of it. And so, I mean, there's one institution who liked showing that they're doing good work. So, and that was a nice lunch last week as well. I do have a question on some numbers questions. It's on page G137, having to do with diversion, and I'll say yay again. We meet 70% a year ahead of schedule. It's very exciting, and what the school districts are doing is great. If we say I'm looking at I'm trying to do some calculations, and maybe I'm looking at the numbers wrong. If we reach 70% diversion, it says tons of solid waste disposed of at Teguis citywide at 88,000 tons, and then there's 3 more items diverted: recyclables, green waste, food scraps, and it says 18,300, 11,000, and 2,500. Which, now is that, first question, is that per franchise? So am I supposed to double those numbers, or?
Madam Mayor, that's total citywide. That's
Total
both
citywide.
Allied and
Okay.
Marburg's collected. This is just franchise tonnages, but that's both.
So 18,300, 11,000, and 2,500, that totals 31,500. But that's certainly not 70% of the total. If you look at the calculation, right, everything there is 119,500, and if only 31,500 is diverted, that's obviously not 70%. So what am I missing here?
Madam Mayor, that's a great question, and hopefully I can give you a real brief answer, because it could get long. And but I'll try to do that. We have a new base year as of 2004 for the entire city. The waste that's generated, our pie, is $289,000, or 289,000 tons. Everything that's generated in the city. So that includes pallets being used behind a store that just got a shipment in it. It includes paper waste that may be picked up by a private recycler that's not getting paid for it. It includes everything that's part of the waste generation, part of the transactions of the city of Santa Barbara. There's 290,000 tons essentially of waste being generated. So 88,000 tons of anticipated disposal is the number that we put in the numerator. The denominator is 290,000. That's how we calculate our total disposal rate. And then we just inverse that to get our recycling rate or our diversion rate. What goes into the base year is extremely thorough and complicated. There's a lot that's added to that. These, again, are just franchise tonnages. This is material that's touched by Marburg or Allied at the curb for the residential sector, multi-unit, and business sector. There are thousands of roll-off boxes every year that get picked up by Marburg and Allied that are taken to the C&D facility and sorted. Lots and lots of material go to Santa Barbara Sand and Topsoil. Lots of material goes to the city yard from the streets activities, the streets crews. There's just a lot of stuff that doesn't get reflected in these
Not
numbers.
in these
the
numbers.
whole
Okay.
number, though, the big pie, the denominator is 290,000 tons.
Okay, so also a construction company or a home remodel or whatever, the contractors, I mean, all of that, that's obviously not through the hauler either. They're renting a dump and truck or a bin and dealing with their C&D recycling. That's not in here.
Correct. And I'm glad you asked that, too, because there's one more thing that we're refining. That's the Unscheduled Collection Permit Ordinance, the UCPO that Council approved about 2 years ago, where if you have more than I think it's 7 tons gross vehicle weight vehicle, or more than a 10 cubic yard box for construction demolition debris, we're getting that system set up so that those reports are coming in on a more regular basis to my staff so we can actually start quantifying those numbers and adding them to our P3s. It's a whole other waste stream that we haven't been able to measure for several years, but as the Unscheduled Permit Ordinance, Unscheduled Permit Program gets more refined and we get more reliable reporting, we'll start incorporating those into our documents.
Okay. And then, so the Zahiguas is easy in terms of tonnage that you weigh it when the truck gets in, and that's how you know how much, because it's by tonnage. The other diversion stuff, how do we know what the numbers are here are true? I mean, there's no scale anywhere. I mean, we just get the numbers and plug them in. I mean, this has come up, and, so how do we know the numbers that we get so we can say it's 70% diversion, that we're on it?
Madam Mayor, these numbers, everything that's on the P3s reflects actual weights at a scale or a facility that has a scale. The recyclables, tons of recyclables that are diverted, they either go to the Marburg facility if it's a commercial customer and a dumpster. That goes to the Marburg C&D Center currently. They've shut down the airport facility temporarily, but that goes in, it goes across a scale, and that truck is weighed. The haulers...
Go there?
Pardon me?
And if it doesn't go there?
If it doesn't go there, it's been picked up from a cart can customer. It's smaller, and it goes to the county. County transfer station handles all the cart and can customers. They have scales at the front of that facility. So every ton that's reflected or noted in these reports are actually weighed. We have hard numbers for all of these reports or all of these calculations.
So
for
when
the
we
different
say we're
material
diverting
types.
70%, it's coming from figures from somewhere where it was weighed and the numbers given to you, and you have that information that you can refer
No,
to.
it's simpler than that. It's the base year, like I was saying a minute ago. It's much more simplified because to go out and chase every single ton that's in the community every year would take 3 or 4 months and probably a few consultants' time and lots of staff and lots of money. It is the base year that we calculated back in 2004. That's what we know as our base year. That's our total generation with that divided into the disposal amount for that year.
Okay.
We don't try to measure all the other materials every year.
Okay. I know this is going way beyond budget, I know that, but there's been some new questions.
Just so it's clear, this methodology is a methodology that's established by the state. And every city in the state is required to report based on the same methodology to the state every year.
Right. And there's actually legislation that keeps popping up about changing everything, and what does that mean, and do you get credit for doing other things, and so that's a constant conversation. Okay. I know that goes way beyond this next year's budget, but I think there's enough newness up here to get a good, we haven't really had a council review on solid waste. We haven't talked trash up here very much, have we? At least not about solid waste. Mr. Hotchkiss, did you have?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Also beyond the budget, but not too far. The reason that our costs go up to Tahigas is increased tipping fees, is that correct?
That's correct.
And secondly, on the ballot that we just got in the mail, there was something about a 2/3 vote for cities to be able to bring on new electrical customers. Now, has that got anything at all or to do with our conversion system down the line? Do you know what I'm talking about? I can't remember what the proposition is.
Through
You're
Pacific
familiar?
Gas. Mr. Williams should know.
Good.
He's speaking of the Prop 16, the PG&E effort to be able to end cities' abilities to do community choice aggregation or municipal utilities.
So does our conversion down the line, would that be affected possibly by that?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hotchkiss, I don't know the definitive answer. It could, but I don't know.
Okay.
I don't have a definitive answer.
Last question, food scraps. Since it saves businesses money, why would you not do it? Why isn't everybody on board?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Hotchkiss, that's another great question, and I think the limiting factor is just the fact that I have 3.5 staff dedicated to this. I could have 7, and we could have all the businesses in the city that produce food scraps on board within a year and a half or so, I think. But we're doing what we can with the resources we have.
Great answer. I didn't mean to point fingers at all. I just think from a business point of view, I'd be knocking on your door. Thanks so much.
We have a list.
And people have been knocking, so. Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Thank you. Enough trash. Let's go take off somewhere, airport.
Back about 30 seconds, not even.
While they're doing the switcheroo, I just want to tell Karen and Hazel that if I leave at 3 o'clock, it's not because your presentation is boring. It's because I'll have to go to the Peabody School Board hearing and help balance their budget in the face of budget cuts from the state. So I'm just going to have to exist in 2 different places at once, which is occupational hazard.
Don't take it personally, right?
Never.
Ms. Ramsdale or Ms. Hazel.
Or breathe a sigh of relief, or whatever the case may be.
No, we already had that ribbon
Probably
cutting.
will be
We're done
boring,
with that. We're done with that.
Yeah, right. Do you want to leave now? Well, before we start, I'd like to introduce who's up here with me, Assistant Airport Director Hazel Johns and Airport Operations Manager Tracy Lincoln and Karen Ramsdale, Airport Director. Our presentation on the Airport Department's proposed fiscal year 2011 budget will include an overview of the department, our goals, a discussion of our projected revenues and expenditures, and will highlight our most significant performance objectives. The Airport Department's mission is to provide the region with safe, modern, convenient facilities to access the national air transportation system. As an enterprise fund, we are self-supporting through tenant rents and user fees. We use no local tax dollars. Federal law requires that airport revenues be spent on airport operations, maintenance, and capital improvements. The Airport Department organization, we have 54 employees. While we have 3 major divisions, we have 8 programs between those divisions. Our employees range in service from 34 years to 10 months in terms of service to the city, with an average length of service of 14 years. So I think that speaks well of people's dedication and loyalty to working for the city. The Airport Department is somewhat unusual in that we contract with the city fire department for 9 firefighters to staff the aircraft rescue and firefighting response at the airport that we are required to provide. And we contract with Public Works for 2 full-time engineers to oversee design and construction of the airport's capital projects. While there are 3 main divisions, as I mentioned, we provide 8 programs. Administration oversees the overall management of the airport and guides future planning efforts. Business and Properties manages over 300,000 square feet of building space and 4.7 million square feet of land. They also manage the airport's parking contract and administer about $3 million in FAA grants each year. Our Marketing and Communications program works with our airline service consultant to encourage airlines to improve current service or add new service. And in addition, this program oversees our marketing program and public information. Our maintenance division has 2 programs, and one is aimed at maintenance of the 56 buildings that are on the airport and the infrastructure. And the second is air operations area maintenance, responsible for inspection and maintenance of the airfield. The airport security program provides security and law enforcement services to comply with federal requirements, as well as security to the airport's commercial industrial properties. And because the airport is a commercial service airport, we must meet FAA certification requirements. So the certification and operations program ensures that the airport complies with the federal aviation regulations. And as part of that is a requirement, as I mentioned previously, to have aircraft rescue and firefighting services 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And there comes in our contract with City Fire for 9 firefighters who are stationed at the airport, and we pay the City Fire Department $1.8 million a year for that service. This program also works with community members and pilots to minimize aircraft noise in the residential areas around the airport. The Facility Planning and Development Program is responsible for planning, permitting, and constructing the airport's capital improvement projects. And with the airfield safety and the airline terminal projects, this program has managed over $70 million worth of capital projects over the last few years. Since 1990, the airport has contracted with the Public Works Department for 2 full-time engineers at a cost of $342,000. This chart illustrates the number of airport employees assigned to each program. However, it does not reflect the fire and public works employees. About almost 75% of our employees are either in maintenance-related positions or security positions. You will notice as we go through our presentation that the new airline terminal is a recurring theme reflected in our budget goals, budget development, and operational planning. Our goal for this year was to develop a balanced budget that incorporated the initial operating costs for the airline terminal. As the new terminal will finish construction about this time next year, maybe a little earlier, there will be several months of operating costs that we will incur, so that is included in this budget. And in developing our projected revenue, we took into consideration the continued economic conditions, reductions in the airline industry, meeting our cash flow projections, and Hazel will talk about our cash flow projections in a moment, and maintaining our current levels of service and capital improvements. And now Hazel will review our revenue analysis and expenditure assumptions.
Like the general fund, the airport starts the budget by looking at our revenues or identifying those first and then making sure that our expenditures and capital program balance back into it. This chart provides you an overview of the lines of business for the airport for our budget of $13 million for next year. Commercial industrial property is $3.9 million. That continues to grow slightly each year between 2% and 3%. Years ago, that percentage of 31% was closer to 50%. And what we've done is work with each category to make sure that when opportunities arise, that we increase our revenues as much as possible. Interest and other is a combination of interest, which is $231,000 projected for the operating fund this year, coupled with our reimbursement from TSA for security. Non-commercial aviation, it's everything inside the airfield, generally called general aviation, and that includes tenant rents, percentage reports, and fuel flowage fees. Under the terminal, we have all of the concessions, parking at $2.7 million, rent-a-cars at about $1.6 million, food and beverage, and retail make up the difference. Commercial aviation, that's airline, rentals for the building, as well as landing fees. On this summary of revenues, I have highlighted two that have a big variance. As you can see, commercial aviation begins to go up, and that's because they're going to be paying about 3 times as much for the space at the new terminal as they have now. The actual per square foot rental charge is not going up 25%. Rather, it'll only be less than 3%. But they have so much more space to rent, therefore we generate more revenue. Interest income, just to call your attention again, that it is decreasing based on the current investment market. So overall, our revenues are up 5%. Airline space rental will be about $250,000 more for us. Some of the enhanced revenues that we began this year, general aviation landing fees, are for all charter operators and any transient aircraft of 10,000 pounds or greater. And that's generating about $250,000 as well. Self-service fuel flowage fees, we just had this facility open in April. So I don't know yet how much it's going to do, but I know that it was a request from the general aviation community, and we're pleased to have it. Rental car, QTA funded operational expenses, about $80,000. That's incorporated into our operational budget. We do a long-term cash flow, but this one is just for the next 3 years to show you the impact of the new airline terminal. You'll notice a while ago I said commercial aviation was creeping up, but you'll see it almost doubles in the next 3 years, going from about $2.1 to $4.1 million. And that, once again, is just incremental increases in per square foot rate for the airlines. And hopefully more passengers, but that comes later. I don't know that there's any other big change here, except that the revenues are projected to go up about $2.7 million in the next 3 years. Carrying forward the revenues at the top, then we look at our expenses. And under salaries and benefits, we have not made any adjustments for any union negotiated adjustments on that, but it does include a couple of new positions, which we'll talk about shortly. Supplies and services will also go up, but with the new terminal, we'll have maintenance needs that we don't have today. We'll have escalators, more elevators, boarding bridges. Those costs have been, we've tried to factor those in and carry them forward.
Ms. Jones, we have a question from Mr.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. You didn't know.
Thank you.
You know, I'm glad I looked through my notes before I left, and one of the things that struck me that I couldn't understand was on G23, the difference between the amended and FY10 and projected FY10 for both revenue and for use of reserves seems basically like all of a sudden $20 million disappeared in the thin of air. But I know what you must be accounting for it differently, because, and the reason why I know is because I know that the airline terminal project is a large enough capital expense that you've got to have it spread over more than 1 year. And so I'm trying to figure out, especially in the capital program, where are we spending the terminal project, and how, is it spread over 2 years, 3 years on that budget, or what? I'm trying to understand those numbers, specifically the revenue line and the capital program line. On G23,
Talk about my 7 funds.
Mr. Armstrong?
And I'll basically give you some time to delay. is just one other thing I didn't see in the slide is how many jobs are being produced locally with the airline terminal project, which is, the last time I checked, there was like 250 people working out there, and this is an enormous amount of middle income trades jobs, for folks that, most of those sectors are out of work, 30 to 50% unemployment. So it's great that we are essentially helping keep middle-class folks at work at the toughest economic time. Was that enough of a delay for you to? Okay.
Yes. In terms of the jobs, we just did a kind of thumbnail calculation for our professional organization, and we estimate about 329 jobs that are generated.
This is just the
direct
terminal
jobs.
project itself?
Right. And this, of course, is an estimate based on the value of the total project. So.
And I'll give you the short answer, and then if Mr. Samario wants to correct me, and this is one of the problems we have. I think this came up in one of the other budgets that has high capital. If you look on the amended budget towards the bottom where you see capital program $62 million and then spending $19 million, what happens is when we award a contract for construction, we have to have all of the money appropriated because we encumber that, but then, of course, the project takes longer than 1 year to spend it. And so it's appropriated in that amended budget. Then what's going to happen is at the end of this fiscal year, we will then carry over what we don't spend this year, and that will go into the proposed budget next year. Is that correct?
Even though it says in FY 2011 that we're only spending $500,000 for capital, that's going to actually rise because some of the amount that we didn't spend in FY 10 is going to be in FY 11.
Exactly.
So that $20 million
Twice
didn't
here.
disappear. It just moved over to FY 2011, and we haven't
We'll carry over
put
the
that
appropriation
down on paper yet.
along with the encumbrance because we still have a contract with these contractors for this work. So the encumbrance will get carried over, which is an appropriation, and then the revenue will get carried over to cover that expense.
And how much is the total terminal project?
The total project, if you look at the current construction contract that we have right now, is about $35 million.
Okay.
The overall project, though, with the ramp and all of the other elements, is really closer to $63,000.
Great. Okay. Thank you.
63 million, not 1,000, I'm sorry.
We got good bids, but
We got good bids, not that good. Right.
On this cash flow projection, there is a new item for the airport. As you'll notice, it says debt service. And historically, the airport has always paid cash for any of our capital improvements. And we've saved money over the years to make some major ones. But in this particular case, this is the first debt service payment that the airport department will be making on our bond issue. We capitalized 2.5 years' worth of interest to allow us to get the construction completed and occupied. So we will be saving up money in the years between now and then, and also we'll readjust our cash flow prior to that time to ensure that we have sufficient coverage. Earlier you mentioned policy reserves. This is our reserves as of July 1st, starting this fiscal year. Each one of the council required policy reserves are fully funded, and we had a surplus of $1.2 million, which will be used for the terminal. Our expenditure assumptions, as Karen mentioned, we were really trying just to incorporate any identified costs that we could come up with for the new terminal, as well as maintain our existing facilities and assets. Under supplies and services, just shy of half of that amount, as you can tell, is for our interdepartment agreements. Special projects includes the cost to operate the parking shuttle operation. There are 4 vehicles in that operation going back and forth. Allocated costs transfers out include money from the operating fund that go into our capital program so that we can have a capital program that's fully funded by the airport's revenues. Salaries and benefits are not adjusted, as I said earlier, for any anticipated union negotiations. Appropriated reserve is slightly higher than is required. As you know, appropriated reserve is 0.5% of the operating budget. But in order to balance this graph, we put more money into appropriated reserve. Summary of expenses. Once again, salary and benefits at 6% is just programmed into the cash flow with routine adjustments going forward. Other, as I mentioned, is the parking shuttle operation. We have 4 vans, and it is expensive to take care of those, as well as our automated parking equipment also requires a maintenance contract, and that is added into that particular line item. Appropriate reserves and transfers out. You can tell over the years our capital project that we've funded, we're really focusing on the terminals, so we have limited our capital program for the next year. Operational expenses on a history basis, the maroon color reflects salaries. Generally, if we have salary adjustments, it includes any increases we might get, but it also, we have added staff over the years. Quite frankly, since 9/11, we've added more and more security staff, no real maintenance staff changes, and some administrative changes. Supplies and services, as you can tell with the lime green, is pretty much balanced. It has very little fluctuation. Allocated costs are there, and then ARF expenses, you see, continues to climb. Engineering in the gray, they're pretty flat. And equipment, of course, will vary depending on our needs. Proposed staffing changes. As I indicated, we have had difficulty filling all of the airport patrol officer positions since 9/11. I believe we had them all fully occupied once since, was it that long? 60 days, Tracy said. So finally we took a look at that operation and the security tasks that need to be done, and decided that those that did not need arrest authority, a badge and a gun, could be done by somebody else. And so we are proposing to eliminate 2 vacant airport patrol officer positions and realign the duties so that 1 full-time security operations assistant could take those duties on. Those include like inspection of the airfield, responding to calls for a lost airplane, looking at fences to make sure that there's been no breach. We are also requesting 2 full-time custodians. The new terminal, as you all know, is a little over 3 times bigger than what we have, and we just need more staff. It's that simple. So we're requesting for 2 full-time custodians. But the net increase in cost is only about $17,000, so that seems like a reasonable amount. Our capital development program for next year, as I indicated, airport funded will be $550,000. This is our annual amount that we pretty much assigned for taking care of our assets, and it is funded with our projected revenues. We're not using any reserves. This is a list of those projects or categories. Generally, it's street paving, airfield paving, hazardous materials, and of course building maintenance, which could include a new roof, repainting buildings, that sort of thing, and the airport infrastructure, sewer and water lines repair. We also have a T-hanger fund, and we're quite proud of our 24 T-hangers. We accomplished this with a state loan from Caltrans Aeronautics for the buildings themselves, along with grants from FAA for the ramp and the taxi lane. Right now,
excuse me, what is T-hanger?
I'm sorry?
T-hanger, what does that mean?
T-hanger, it's a shape of a
it's the
aircraft
shape you're
storage
referring to.
facility. It literally looks like a T, an inverted T. The rentals that we receive don't completely cover the cost, and we knew that going in, that the airport would have to subsidize it for about 7 years. This does show a touch of interest that we're getting on our income, and then a transfer from the airport operating fund. That was part of the transfers out, that $31,000 to cover the total cost of the T-hangers. The expenses include materials, utilities, and janitorial supplies. We have an overhead allocation that goes to the finance department or to the city, insurance, and then principal and interest. So we're fully covered in that one. Customer facility charge, the QTA facility that was opened in November. Revenues from that are, as we discussed before, $10 per contract, rental car contract, generating about $580,000 for the year. Interest at $15,000. And CFC reserves, this fund has money that has been accumulating from the CFCs prior to, since we started the CFC collections in January of 2006. We also are anticipating a rebate over the first 5 years, I believe, from Southern California Edison. So that's $47,000 that we're budgeting for next year. On the expenditure side, this is an excellent investment for the city. It's a 7% interest. City loaned the airport the money, and over a 20-year period, we're to repay that. So we have, again, an overhead allocation and then interest and principal coming back to the city. Our airport bond and capital, the airport terminal, as I mentioned earlier, we capitalized interest for 2.5 years. This year's in the budget is $2.5 million will be paid. Our first debt service is January 1. And the total amount is $3,143,000. On the operating cash flow projection earlier, you noticed that I only showed the 1.8. That's because the balance of that payment will come from passenger facility charge, and those funds are accumulating as right now to pay that debt. And council approved that application last December to cover the whole cost of the that portion of our debt service for 30 years. Back to Karen.
Performance objectives assist the department in evaluating programs and resource allocation. Our 8 programs have a total of 48 objectives, but I'm not going through all 48. I'm just going to highlight a few for each of the programs for fiscal year 2011. And as you'll see, again, the theme of the airline terminal is very strong through our objectives. In the bottom right-hand corner of the slide is the page that corresponds with these objectives in the budget book. In administration, one of the chief objectives will be to coordinate and plan for the transition of relocating the tenants from the existing terminal to the new building. Also, finishing out our public arts program by developing the rotating regional art display and historical display. In business and property, again, coordinating tenant improvements from the concessions in the new terminal will be critical to opening the building on schedule. The execution of new agreements with the airlines is also important in terms of formalizing the new rental structure that will support the debt payments. Our marketing and communications program will be planning and implementing the grand opening events for the new terminal. The facilities maintenance program objectives will be to develop a preventive maintenance program for the new building, as it will have many systems that our current terminal does not have. An air operations maintenance program complying with our the airport's stormwater pollution prevention plan is one of our major objectives. And steam cleaning of the air carrier ramp is one of the best management practices that helps pollutants from being carried to the creeks and ocean during stormy weather. Let's see. In security program, in addition to emergency calls, we also receive non-emergency calls, and this objective sets a standard for response time for those non-emergency calls by Airport Patrol. In the certification and operations program, one of the airport's FAA certification requirements is to conduct a full-scale emergency exercise every 3 years. And the objective for this program will be to conduct this exercise this fall. And finally, Airport Commission reviewed and recommended at their regular meeting on April 21st that Council approve the Airport Department's fiscal year 2011 budget and capital program. Thank you.
Great. Any questions?
Yes.
Mr. Hotchkiss?
We got a bunch sort of all over the park here. Is there still a grace period for parking, 15 minutes or something, or not?
Go ahead.
Mayor, Councilman Hotchkiss, yes, there is a 15
It
minutes.
is 15 minutes, okay. I'm wondering with all the security stuff that's required, if that's ample, you know, by the time you get out of your car, you're racing, you do whatever you have to do, you come out and it's 20 minutes, you're like, ah. So I really don't know, I'm just suggesting. You mentioned the self-service fuel flowage. Is that just like going to the service station, slipping in your credit card?
It actually is. It's a tank that sits on the
What
ramp.
you do out there, is that right? Fill her up, okay.
Yay, I think that's a first time.
Yeah.
Second.
That's great. Do we get, and maybe you covered this and I didn't catch it, do we get revenues per passenger passing through the airport, either on the ticket or from the airlines or?
We have a passenger facility charge, and that's the amount that, right now it's $4.50.
Does that appear on one's ticket when you buy the airline ticket? Okay.
It should be at the bottom showing other fees and charges.
So airlines, if I'm flying to New York and back, for every airport that I pass through, there's going to be one of those little charges in the bottom?
There's a limit of how much they can charge. I think the limit is $12
Okay,
per
well, that's
ticket.
good.
But you also have federal tax on that ticket as well.
Why a miles ticket's never really free.
Say what?
That's why a miles ticket that you get is never really free, right? Because of all the
Okay.
Right, good point. Does the rental car QTA charge of $10, does that show up as a tax on the rental car? How does that pass through?
It's under California state law, it's a fee that is assessed based on the activity on the air, or that rent cars can do for the airport, and it is dedicated to the design and construction of joint use rent-a-car facilities. It can't be used for anything else. So on your ticket, it should not show up as a tax, but rather as an assessment.
Okay. You mentioned the historical display, I think you did, Karen. Can you tell me, because I know we have a fabulous history out there.
Yeah, we do. When we remodel or rehabilitate the historic terminal, after we move in the new terminal, the base of the tower of the historic terminal will be a historic display of some type, but we haven't, gotten to the point of developing it.
Okay, and is that going to be easily accessible from the new terminal?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
In fact, many people going from the long-term lot to the new building will go right through the historic.
Right, because I was really impressed the first time I went to the airport and started looking at all those pictures and thought, gee, there's real depth here. It's terrific to see.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I noticed that you're proposing to hire 2 new custodians. And did you look into, and I know that there's, in discussing this with staff over these last couple of months, there's a need to have control or proprietorship for some of these services. But was there any look at hybridizing that so that you have somebody who's in charge, but yet some of those services are contracted out?
Either one.
And obviously with the intent of lowering costs?
Correct. We have in the past had kind of a hybridization of custodial services in the terminal, and found that many contract services, the employees were unable to communicate with the public, and our custodians get asked a lot of questions and do a lot of directing of passengers. So we tried to, at least during the busiest times when the public is in the building, to have our employees. We do have contractual services that provides special floor cleaning or tasks that our custodians don't do. We also use contractual services for other airport department buildings on the airport. So we kind of do have a hybrid.
Mr. House?
Just a couple of things. On back to the slide on cash flow projections. I just want to be sure I understand the first line up there. Ms. Johns, you had mentioned that the increases that we're seeing between 2010 and 2013, that was the title. There you go. No, that's not the one. The one that says revenues. I'm sorry. There you go. That was based primarily from the square footage increases, but I think you meant the actual amount of square feet, right? I mean, like the big change, the big shift is that there's going to be a big change in the number of square feet that are being paid for. But then the difference between 2012 and 2013, that difference would be just based on the annual rate per square foot?
Yes, Mayor and Councilman House, the changeover on commercial aviation from 2011 to 2012, the major increase is because it's a full year of occupation of the terminal by the airlines. In the second year, it goes up, and that is predicated on our expenses at the airport. If our expenses go up, then the formula that we use adjusts the per square foot rate for the airlines.
Okay. And do they have leases with us for long periods of time, or is it year to year, month to month? How does that work?
Historically, we've had annual operating permits, not an actual lease agreement.
I see.
And the way the airlines operate now and probably will operate in the future, they really prefer not to have long-term agreements. The agreement that Karen mentioned that we'll be negotiating will probably be no more than 3 years. So many of the contractors that we have are not contractors, but the airlines contract with major carriers, SkyWest for United and Delta. Those contracts are bid on a schedule, generally 3 years, and so that's why they don't want to really commit to a long-term agreement.
I see. But part of their agreement is that when our costs increase, theirs do too. In other words, there's a direct relationship between those things.
Exactly.
And just to add, when we were doing the pro formas for the new terminal, it was in close consultation with the airlines, and we also looked at our rates versus other airports nationally. And so the airlines are well aware of this, and we're still kind of in the middle. And, of course, they're very excited about the additional space, and we're very supportive of this project. So they're well aware of the kinds of square footage costs we're talking about.
I recall that they were seemed like they were intimately involved in the early phases of all this, and I suppose you're keeping that relationship very warm.
Actually, in the last 3 weeks, we've met with the airlines and are finalizing their space requirements, where the kiosks are going to go, the bag conveyor belt system that you just approved yesterday. They were very much involved with that, as was TSA. So it's almost a daily conversation with the tenants at the airport.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned the shuttles, and that kind of is an extraordinary expense. But I know we have a temporary arrangement, but aren't we ultimately going to still need those once the dust is settled? We're still going to have a long-term lot that's off-site, right?
That's correct. We will. However, once we open back up and we have the short-term lot at the terminal in front of the new building and the long-term lot, most of the traffic during the year would only be employees being transported back and forth.
Because the new long-term lot will be sufficient.
Exactly, and therefore we can reduce the number of vans operating at one time. But as you know, the long-term goal for the airport is to relocate the general aviation activity south of the terminal to the north, and then proceed with another terminal expansion and parking.
Got it.
That's
long. Right. And the terminal itself has been designed so that can happen. It's won't be a surprise when we get there. We've already designed it to be able to expand the capacity. And then the last question is, and this came from the Airport Commission. I know one of the commissioners had asked a question about any savings that we might have due to renegotiation with the bargaining units or whatever might happen this year. Could that additional revenue be used to accelerate some of the debt payment, or I guess my question is more open-ended. How would we be utilizing those savings? You're going to be you didn't put that into this budget, furloughs or any of those kinds of things, right? So when that happens, which would be citywide as an agreement, what do you anticipate utilizing those funds for?
traditionally, any additional funds that the airport receives that exceed our operating expenses would go into our capital program. And if we did not have a capital program need at that time, there's not a. It's conceivable that we could prepay the debt, the bond debt.
Not the city one. We like the interest rate.
Shucks.
Since it's our highest interest rate.
So it would.
I know. It is.
Kind of tickle a funny bone there. I like that. It's good. Okay.
Tell myself that every day.
So it is possible to do that as well.
Well, just because the history of the airport has been to be debt-free, basically. I mean, this is the first time, so I
Right.
think that's what gave rise to that question.
Exactly.
All right, well, thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
I'm excited for next year's budget because we'll be so much closer to everything. One question about TSA and the changes in eliminating the 2 airport patrol officer positions, having a security position, so the security levels there. The TSA personnel that's there is paid for by FAA, not the airport, or how it's paid for by TSA, so not paid for through the airport. But what level of enforcement authority do they have beyond the baggage? I mean, can they arrest? Can they? I mean, just how does that interact with our airport patrol division?
Mayor Schneider, they do not have arrest authority. The federal security director theoretically has the authority to shut down the entire airport should there be a security threat that he feels would put people at risk. Other than that, they are not limited to baggage. They do have roving patrols. They go all over the airport. We have what they call different types of operations, playbook operations, and we work with them on those. So their authority reaches beyond the checkpoint and baggage, but they do not have arrest authority, and they do work closely with our law enforcement. And whenever they come upon a situation that they feel they may need any enforcement assistance, then they immediately call our patrol officers.
So certainly as TSA personnel has increased over the years, there's more eyes and ears looking around and making sure things are safe, which then assists our patrol officers, even though that level, we're even eliminating 2 positions. But in terms of the level of eyes and ears looking around for safety, over time it's probably increased.
It has significantly increased, and the existing people that were there are looking closer now. So yeah,
Right.
there's a lot of benefit there.
Which is happening all across the
It
world,
works.
if not the country.
It's the most effective layer of security anywhere.
Yeah. Okay. Mr. Hotchkiss, you had another question.
Yeah, one more thing to sort of continue in the theme of what I was talking before about the grace period. It seems to me you have this,
I want my 20
another
minutes.
cheap deal here. No, but you have this is going to be a jewel, the crown jewel of Santa Barbara, I think, when it opens. You know, it's just going to be fabulous. And I was thinking about that historical display, and I thought, gee, could we have docents or something that actually help people? And then along that lines, I would hope that the restaurant, whatever it is not just a place where you get a hot dog. You know, it's got. I mean, it would be great if it was really great service and the highest quality, and we really shoot for the top. That's kind of what I'm talking about in this whole thing.
This is the docents that go to that special Hotchkiss coffee place that for the competition, and yeah.
The $1.50 latte deal, right? Hey, we get a lot of business out there, you know, if it was $1.50 for a latte.
I'm telling you, the name Frank Cup of Joe, I really like it, you know.
There we go, Cup of Frank.
Well, we will have. Yes, right.
It's the end of the day, so
The main restaurant operation will be on the second floor, so the general public won't, unless they're ticketed passengers, won't go up there. We will have a smaller food concession on the first floor, and they will be, you know, first-class operations. But typically, the restaurant at the airport has not been, because we have paid parking, has not been a big draw in terms of, you know, having people come and just hang out at the restaurant. The major customers are the airline passengers, and in the current situation, maybe people picking them up or dropping them off. We did try, what do you call it, kind of parking? Validated parking at one time, and it turned out to be just a nightmare. But in terms
What kind of parking? You mean like a...
validate the
Oh, I see.
restaurant. Because I don't think most people realize is that the businesses are the ones that pay for the validation, and the restaurant just could not be profitable and pay for validation as well as, get the extra business. So that wasn't very successful at the airport. But in terms of the history display, we've also had discussions with the Santa Barbara County Arts Commission staff about being able to do like a podcast or use your iPhone or iPod to go around to either the artwork or the history displays and tune in and be able to listen to an interpretation
Very
of it.
cool. Great
So
idea.
there's some very cool things that will come
Oh,
with this.
that'd be
this
great.
project.
Thanks so much.
One other thing, too, the ambassadors. We do have ambassadors at the airport now, and we'll have that program in the future. So although they might not be docents, they will provide information services and direction for the passengers
Well, that's
and
even
the
better.
visitors.
Great.
Great. Thank you very much. We'll take, I guess, a quick break as Waterfront's coming in. If we could do that. Great.
Watching the world go by, watching the world go by. Do 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 do. Do 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 do. Do 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 do.
The touch of your lips upon my brow, your lips that are cool and sweet, such tenderness lies in their soft caress. My heart forgets to beat. The touch of your hands upon my head, the love in your eyes, a shine. And now at last, the moment divine, the touch of your lips to mine, the touch of your lips that are cool, cool and sweet, such tenderness lies in their soft caress. My heart forgets to beat. The touch of your hands upon my head, the love in your eyes, a shine. And now at last, the moment divine, the touch of your lips, the touch of your lips, the touch of your lips on mine.
It's only human for anyone to want to be in love, but who out and cry your eyes out and rack your brain. You sit and wonder how anyone as wonderful as he could cause you such misery and pain. I thought that I would be in heaven. I'm only up a tree. Oh, it's just my luck to be in love in
When the sun comes out and that rain stops beating on my window pane, when the sun comes out, there'll be bluebirds round my door singing like they did before that old storm broke out, and my gal walked off and left me in the rain.
Mr. Bradley.
Though she's
Madam Mayor, members of the City Council, this afternoon, Scott Reedman, our business manager, will make the presentation, and in addition, both Mick Kronman, our harbor operations manager, and Carl Treiberg are here, our facilities manager, to answer any questions you might have. And that, we'll turn it over to Scott and go through the PowerPoint.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Madam Mayor, council members. Scott Reedman, Waterfront Business Manager. In terms of a department overview, we have 46 full-time employees working in 9 programs, 4 of which are revenue-generating programs. Including the director, we have 4 managers, 6 supervisors, 10 harbor patrol officers, and 26 general employees. In addition, we employ hourly employees in the harbor patrol program, Stearns Wharf maintenance and harbor maintenance programs, and our parking program, particularly in the summer months in the parking program. The Waterfront Department, under the Director and the Administration program, is divided into 3 divisions. My division is the Business Services Division, working left to right, which oversees the property management function, the financial management and accounting program, parking services. Under Mick Kronman is the Harbor Operations Manager, is the Harbor Operations Program, which oversees harbor patrol and marina management. And Carl Treiberg manages the Facilities Division, which oversees harbor and wharf facilities maintenance and also facilities design and our capital improvement programs. In terms of issues and challenges for this budget year, we do not plan on increasing permanent staffing. We've been steady at 46 FTEs for a fair number of years now. One new item is the new debt service for our Marina One loan, and that's a $5.5 million loan from the Department of Boating and Waterways. It's at 4.5% interest over a 30-year term, and it functions like an equity line of credit where our debt service is tied to the amount that we draw down and not the entire amount. On August 1st, we are expected to pay our first installment of $104 $43,000, which will increase gradually as we draw down the loan to $422,000 in fiscal year 16, and will just surpass $500,000 in fiscal year 17. One important thing about this debt service that we need to keep in mind with our budget, the waterfront budget, as we move forward, is we need to maintain a coverage ratio of 1.5 of net income to the debt service payment. In other words, if our debt service payment is $500,000, we need to maintain a net income of, after expenses, of $750,000, or 1.5 times what the debt service payment would be. So we need to keep an eye on that moving forward to stay in compliance with the state loan. And then we will continue the new programs that began on July 1st, the July 4th fireworks contracts, the beach restroom maintenance, beach lifeguard program reimbursement to parks, and that's about $250,000 a year moving forward. One thing I did want to point out was the revenue trend that we've seen. This shows fiscal year 2008, where Waterfront received $11.6 million in revenue. That dropped down to $11.2 million in fiscal year 2009, $11.5 million in fiscal year 2010, and we're just now this year, this next fiscal year, 2011, going to get back to where we were in 2008 levels. So we're trying to bounce back here through fee adjustments and so forth. This is a snapshot graphic of the Waterfront Department's proposed revenue for fiscal year 2011. Totals $11,750,000. About 46% of that, or $5.3 million, is from the Marina Management Program, which includes slip fees and other marina fees. About 33% from property management, 18% from parking services, or $2.1 million. We had significant fee increases in the parking program last year. Interest is 2% of our budgeted revenue, and then other income, it was 1%. And that other is comprised of things like cruise ship visits, for instance, that we had last week, and other forms of revenue, damage to city property, and other reimbursements. In terms of expenditures, our salaries and benefits line item appears to be going up from fiscal year 2010 to 2011, but again, as I think you've heard, this is because the 2011 figures do not include any kind of furlough savings in them yet. Supplies and services is expected to drop by about $100,000, mostly due to reduction in the overhead allocation, which was done citywide. And special projects is the 4th of July fireworks contract and the beach lifeguard reimbursement. So overall, the department's expenditure budget is expected to be reduced by $24,000. And again, there's a graphic of the expenditures. The budgeted submittal includes $10,943,000 in expenditures in the operating fund. That's not including the capital fund. About 52% of that is to salaries and benefits, 30% to supplies and services, 15% for debt service, including our new debt service payment to the Department of Boating and Waterways. Again, 1% to special projects, equipment, and appropriated reserves each. The recommended fee increases this year are a slip transfer fee increase of $25 a foot, except for 20-foot slips, which we froze several years ago. 4% slip fee increase is expected to generate $147,000 in new revenue. And this year we're proposing a new fee category for 60-foot and larger slips and end ties, which is expected to generate $40,500. So we expect to see an increase in revenue from these fee increases of $187,000. Just so you understand the 60-foot and larger slip fee and end tie issue, the current maximum rate being charged is the 50-foot rate, which would be $9.74 per foot with the 4% slip fee increase. Under the former system, the 60-foot vessel, 60-foot berth would also be $9.74, and the 70-foot would be $9.74, and so on. So what we did was we looked at the incremental increases in our 10-foot slip increments from how much more is a 20-foot slip per foot than a 30-foot slip than a 20-foot slip, and a 40-foot slip than a 30-foot slip, and so on. And we found the average increase between those 10-foot increments was 8.5%. So we just extrapolated that out from the 50s to the 60s to the 70s and so on, and came up with these new per-foot rates. So we believe this is an equitable arrangement to charge more money per foot for a larger slip, and makes us additional money as well. Capital projects for fiscal year 2011, the most significant, of course, is the continuation of our Marina One rebuilding project. This will be the O&P dock replacement, again from the loan from the California Department of Boating and Waterways. Marina renovation, that's marina work such as dock box replacement and redecking marinas 2, 3, and 4. Parking lot maintenance is our slurry sealing program, and so on. About halfway down this slide here is the launch ramp concrete grant, and that again is a grant from the Department of Boating and Waterways. $100,000 this year for design and engineering fees if we get it, and $800,000 or $900,000 next fiscal year, FY 2012, for construction of an additional dock finger in the launch ramp and to repair the concrete. And we will pursue this project if and only if we do get that grant. So our total capital project expense for this upcoming fiscal year is $2,555,000, again including $1.2 million from the Department of Boating and Waterways. And that's just a graphic depicting O&P finger. Right now we are rebuilding the main headwalk in Marina One, the trunk of the tree, if you will. That's the big project is scheduled for Monday after next. The new docks are all lined up next to the old dock. And on Monday, they're going to push the old docks out of the way, push the new docks in, put the new gangway on, and hook up the utilities. And by Tuesday, Carl promises we'll be up and running again. We'll look at some 6-year cash flow spreadsheets. We look 6 years ahead in our budgeting forecasts. We have some assumptions that we carry forward most years. In this slides you're about to see, we are projecting revenue growth, for instance, in lease and parking revenue of 2% per year, slip transfer fee increases of $25 per foot per year, additional slip fee increase of 3% in 2012, and then going back down to 2% per year thereafter. We've also factored in the Maritime Museum lease pay down of $340,000 in fiscal year 2013. This will relieve them of their base rent payments through a negotiated agreement 2 years ago. They will be forgiven their base rent payments for the remainder of the 25 years of their lease, but they will still be responsible for their slip fees for their display boats and also for their common area maintenance charges associated with running that building. And we also have $1.9 million in unfunded projects in our capital program. This is primarily 2 elevators, replacement of a patrol boat, and the last phase of the breakwater replacement. So our total operating revenue for this period is expected to be $11.6 million in 2010, ranging to $13 million in fiscal year 2016. Operating expenditures, $10.8 million in fiscal year 2010, ranging to $12.4 million in fiscal year 2016. And I'd like to focus your attention for a moment on the bottom row, the yellow row there on the spreadsheet. If you look at fiscal year 2011, there's a number there, 1.79, and that's our debt coverage ratio for 2011 for our new loan from the State Department of Boating and Waterways. So it shows that we will be able to maintain compliance with that loan contract. Going forward, you can see we do fairly well until we get out to 2015, where we're getting down to 1.57 debt coverage ratio, and then in 2016 we drop below the requirement of the 1.5 debt service coverage ratio. So as we move forward, we'll have to keep an eye on that and make sure we keep that at or above 1.5 to remain in compliance with the loan agreement. So our net operating gain after expenses is expected to range from $785,000 in fiscal year 2010 this year to $605,000 in fiscal year 2016. In terms of reserve requirements, you're familiar that all city departments have to retain 25% of their operating budget for their operating reserve requirements. Waterfront's no different. We also have a capital reserve fund known as the Harbor Preservation Fund. And per the municipal code, that's required to be maintained at $2 million. If it's maintained between $2 million and $5 million, the interest is required to go back into the Harbor Preservation Fund. If the Harbor Preservation Fund reserve goes above $5 million, Waterfront can use the interest generated in its operating fund as revenue. But I can assure you we're in no danger of running over $5 million in the Harbor Preservation Fund. So our operating reserve requirements are met, ranging from $2.2 million to $2.7 million over the course of the next 6 years. Harbor Preservation Fund ranges from $2.9 million this fiscal year to $1,987,000 in fiscal year 2016. So once again, like the debt service coverage ratio, when we get closer to 2016, we're going to need to adjust to make sure that stays at the mandated level of $2 million or above. And our total reserve balances are anticipated to range from $5.1 million to $4.7 million over the course of the 6-year cash flow. So just to summarize the overall budget, the revenue is budgeted at $11,750,000, expenditures $10,943,000, and we've budgeted $2,555,000 for capital projects, and this will enable us to keep our reserves within policy minimums, above policy minimums for this fiscal year, upcoming fiscal year. Touching on 3 performance objectives, the Marina Management Program is tasked with conducting an annual seafloor debris cleanup known as Operation Clean Sweep, and we held that event last weekend at the harbor. Facilities maintenance is tasked with rebuilding 10 marina slip fingers in Marina 2, and property management, one of the objectives is to audit 25% rent leases annually, which is about 8 leases per year that we audit. And I'd like to note that the Harbor Commission, at a December meeting prior to any budget discussions, just in relation to a routine lease audit update report, the Harbor Commission recommended that we reduce audits to no more than 3 per year for the next 3 years as a money-saving measure. So we had a number of, certainly. And we will come back to that Harbor Commission recommendation at the end. Following our mid-year budget review with the Harbor Commission in January, we had 4 publicly noticed meetings with the Harbor Commission, 2 with the Budget Subcommittee, Harbor Commission Budget Subcommittee, and 2 with the full Commission. So we had 4 publicly noticed meetings where we covered the fee increases, the revenues and the expenditures, and the new 60-foot category of slip fees. And I'd just like to point out that for those 4 meetings, 1 member of the public showed up at one of the meetings and did not have any comments. So the Harbor Commission's recommendation was moved to recommend approval of the Department fiscal year 2011 budget and fee increases, and that was a unanimous vote by the Harbor Commission. Again, referring back to the lease audit, they also moved in December, independently of budget discussions, to reduce the number of tenant lease audits being performed over the next 3 years from 8 approximately to no more than 3 per year, so the program has a proper cost-to-benefit ratio, and that was a 3-2 vote on the audit issue. So finally, the staff recommendation is a 25 per linear foot slip transfer fee increase except for the 20-foot slips, a 4% slip fee increase, the new rate categories for the 60-foot and larger slips and end ties, and that we continue the program objective of auditing 25% of percentage rent leases annually. That concludes my part of the presentation. I think Mr. Bradley would like to add a few words, and I'd be happy to answer any questions after that.
Mr. Bradley.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, just a couple brief things. Again, Scott did a great job of summarizing our challenges, budgetary and our overall operations. I'd like to reemphasize what Scott said relative to fee increases. As you all know, that when we increase fees at the waterfront department, if it's not popular, you tend to hear about it.
I was just mumbling up here about how quiet it is here today.
So I think we did a very good job working with the Harbor Commission this year and giving information to the Harbor community about why the fee increases were necessary. We didn't touch parking fees this year, but we are increasing for 2 years in a row now our slip fees by 4%. They're seeing results. Obviously, the impact of rebuilding a marina and the debt service makes sense to them that there's a return. So I think there's reason for why people did not necessarily complain. But I would point out for the slips that are over 60 foot, in some cases that's a 8 to 50% increase in what they had normally done before. We sent letters to every individual for the 60 foot and above that would be affected. And again, I think they understood that for probably many years they were having a benefit of only being assessed at the 50 foot rate, and that probably was some inequity at that point. So no one necessarily came forward and complained about that. And then lastly, changing the subject but related to fees, yesterday we were at the Finance Committee meeting. We went over somewhat similar to what you just had here today, our fee proposal. And Councilmember Williams and self were there. As you know, Dale was not, and therefore two of them made a recommendation to go along with the fees as proposed, except for the slip transfer fee increase of $25. And that would be an increase from $250 currently per lineal foot up to $275 per lineal foot. They did that with a request that we come back with some analysis as to the necessity of that or the value added of doing that in relationship to our overall budget. And based on discussions with Bob and Jim, we're going to bring that item back to the Finance Committee so that we can have an opportunity to present that information, and also possibly at that time all three members will be present. So we intend to do that before you will have a final decision on our budget. And I think those were the two items that I wanted to comment on, and we're here to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Self.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for a very complete discussion. I was the one who brought up the not to increase the transfer fee, but either I didn't remember it or it was a real brief discussion that you gave us yesterday. I didn't see that there was an exemption up to 20 feet. And so, to me, that makes it reasonable. And I would support that now, based on that information. And I appreciate that it looks like all your figures were done very conservative, and I like that because heaven only knows what's down the road. And so am I correct in assuming that you're basing it on the rents that you're receiving that are less now because the restaurants and other establishments aren't performing as well as they had, and that you are sort of using that line to project revenues?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Self, that's exactly right. We're seeing a decline in our percentage rent revenue from some of our tenants, not all. But it's just an interesting thing I like to point out is that 50% of our property management revenue comes from 5 businesses, 5 restaurants. So that's quite a bit from just 5 operators. And they are seeing a slight downturn in sales, some of them. So that's affecting our revenue.
Thank you. And then, based on the recommendation about having less audits, have the audits been fruitful, or are they being pretty upfront with us? What prompted that?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Self, it's a good question as to what prompted it. We, each year, as part of Scott's property management report to the Commission, is to give them the information and results of our audit program, not only for the year, but kind of historically why we believe there's benefit of auditing percentage rent leases. I think the intent was to look at ways to save operational costs, and it's true, and you're going to see based on the slide that I think Scott's got queued up, that over the last few years we've had less of issues in terms of findings. We started auditing back in 1995, actually about when I became the director of the department. And you can see with some of the initial audits, the amount of money that was recovered was substantial. And so in the initial years of the audit program, we saw great value. And I won't say that people were necessarily trying to not pay as much rent as they maybe were obligated to pay, but it brought in line the need for them to have proper accounting and that their records and their books all needed to tie out. We audit and we look at not only their Z-tape, which is a tape run through their cash register, we look at their bank records, we look at their federal tax, their state tax, and their sales tax. And our auditors really look very closely at that to make sure it all ties out. You can see as the audit program got older, we had less findings. But even in 2008, we had a $26,000 finding where someone owed us as much as $26,000. So we believe with the type of percentage rent leases that we have structured that this is money well spent. Even if it really helps our tenants account for what they're paying, there's benefit to that. It just, we believe, is a good practice with the type of percentage rent structures that we have, that we continue the program. And it was a P3 which the council adopted. So we informed our commission that we would have to bring this issue back to you. It's really your decision with their recommendation. And of course, staff, at the time they made the recommendation, we opposed where they were headed.
I guess my only suggestion would be, I brought up Germany regularly. I love Germany. It's so efficient. You don't stand in a line anywhere. But also they have, they would have something punitive tied to that. And I'm not one to a punitive that, based on the percentage of what they paid, if it's a little bit we found, but yet you have this huge income, it could be one of those bigger numbers. So if you're caught not paying a certain percentage or more, that there be some sort of an assessment for evading rent. And I think that would be an ordinance.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Self, the leases are written such that if a tenant is found through the audit to have understated their rents by more than 2% in any year in the audit period, that they're responsible for paying not only the back due money with interest, but also the audit fees.
Oh, good. Do they?
Yes, they do.
That is enforced?
Oh, yes.
My kind of guys. Thanks.
And I'll just say, John and I talked about this issue, and we decided that although the Harbor Commission had this view that from a staff standpoint, our recommendation was to continue the audit program. This is for about, as I recall, $3.5 million a year gross revenues. And remember what this is. This is basically, we get a percentage of the gross from mainly the restaurants out there. And what we found is rarely, although occasionally it happens, that they underpay or they overpay us, but normally they underpay us if there's an error. And we also believe that the fact that we're now getting, that we have few findings because they know that every 4 years or so they will be audited. And we still think that's appropriate, and $30,000 a year to ensure that $3.5 million is paid in an accurate way. We still felt that was appropriate, although we respect it. We do recognize you could save a little money here, but it's in the scheme of things, we felt it was important to continue it.
Is that Mr. White?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Would you kindly put that previous chart back up? I did not understand it. Yes. So could you help me with what I'm looking at there?
Go ahead, Scotty.
Sure, Madam Mayor, Councilmember House. If you look at the basically the middle column there, that's the total amount of rent, late fees, interest, rent, and on the occasion the CPA's fees as well. So that's the center column there. So for instance, in 1995 we had two major findings that equaled $253,000 of rent revenue collected.
Okay. And then what's that over on the right?
That's the CPA firm fees that the city paid for.
Okay, so PWDM is the name of the company or something like that?
Right. Pine Waltrip, Decker, and McCoy, that's the certified
So
public
then-
accounting firm.
So that's the additional revenue that is found, $250,000 was found, and you paid them $6,000 to do that.
That's correct.
And then we, in 2009, paid them $30,000 and found an extra $805. And so that's where the commission, no doubt, was just looking at it and going, this is getting a little out of whack. Okay. And it's been sort of a tipping point. Yeah, there's a somewhere in the well, it bounces around a bunch, doesn't it? Okay. Well, at least I understand the slide. Okay, that's and then secondly, we have the Marina One monster rehab going on.
A week from Monday, is that what?
And big loan and big project. And then there's on Marina 2, there's a replacement of chunks of it that are going on an ongoing basis. I'm trying to understand the differentiation. Will there be a day when Marina 2 will need that same great big replacement, sort of infrastructural replacement, or are these incremental pieces a substitute method for accomplishing that work?
Madam Mayor, Councilmember White, the latter statement is correct. We can, with staff, go ahead and rehabilitate Marinas 2, 3, and 4, their wooden docking systems, one finger at a time, and extend the life of those facilities 20, 30 years without a single major capital project that's in the, probably in the order of tens of millions after it's all said and done. So it's a slightly different approach. Marina One's concrete docks really lends itself to this large project that's going on right now with a major repositioning of new docks a week from Monday. And then the other ones that we are attempting to deal with staff to avoid that large capital expense all at one time.
And all the others are wood decking? Is that right?
That's correct. Marinas 2, 3, and 4 are all wooden.
And then I'm imagining that, what I've known in the past is on your slip fees, you look elsewhere and you have your comparable jurisdictions that you look at and you use as your part of your justification, as it were, for your fees. And is the over 50 foot, the sort of, what do they call that? Gradational. There's a word for it, just like our income tax. It goes up percentage wise as the size goes up. Graduated, I guess would be a term. Progressive. Is that something that other jurisdictions do, or are you breaking new ground with that?
What Scott has got up now on the PowerPoint is we do it, well, it comes up every time. In fact, we had it at the Finance Committee, but they didn't ask us to get into it yesterday. We do an annual survey to kind of look at our place in Southern California and even Central Coast in relationship to other ports and harbors and marinas. And as we have historically said, and we remain to be, we are lower in all of almost every slip category to our neighbors in terms of our slip rates. But I would like to caution there's a reason for that, and there's several. The first is when the Harbor Master Plan was adopted in 1995, there was a policy that said we should continue to raise all rates land-based with our leases and our parking first before we go to slip rates to make sure that boating remains affordable for recreational families, and that was a goal. Still remains as a goal, so we continue to approach it like that. Probably the most significant reason is that we need elasticity in a rate, a fee. If for some reason we do not get our dredge funding, we will need to go to our users to help offset the cost. We could never afford to pay for it all out of some fee, but we would clearly go to our boaters and our slip fees and have to increase the rates to help offset what hopefully would be a short period of time without that federal funding. The same would be true with our reserves. We would have to go to an immediate reserve to be able to pay that cost until we could get congressional support at some time. So that's the reason. The survey supports the fact that even at a 4% slip fee increase, even on the graduated progressive increases on 60 and above, we're still well below, or at least below the market in almost all categories.
Mr. Hotchkiss.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Do your projections cover PERS contributions and all that stuff to cover out in the future benefit obligations?
Madam Mayor, Councilman Hotchkiss, yes, it does not necessarily cover, I think, if the question is the unfunded liability, but all of our projections for salary and benefit include potential increases in PERS rates, benefit rates, salary increases if there are to be any, based on information which we get from the Finance Department. So as you saw, we do a 6-year cash flow projection. We've increased those salary benefit line items with the expectation of future rate increases.
Okay, great. Regarding the transfer fees, if I've got a 20-foot boat and I transfer it, or transfer I'm not sure how it works here. Whoever takes my slip doesn't have to pay anything, or what's the 20-foot cutoff that Ms. Self was talking about?
You get to a point where the transfer fee at $200, $250 per lineal foot becomes a deterrent to someone who receives that slip either off of our wait list, meaning they have to pay that transfer fee to get it off the wait list, or when they transfer it, say I want to sell my boat to you, you're going to buy my boat, but you're also going to pay the transfer fee. If that transfer fee is, in your mind, too much in order for you to buy the boat, then you won't do it. So for 20s, we believe that we are now at $200 per lineal foot on 20s. And we've froze it at that.
That'd be $4,000 then, right?
Correct. So we've frozen that rate at that, and we would not increase this $25 on that. At 25s, 30s, 35s, we do not believe that our transfer fee would have any deterrent to someone who would be either getting it off of the wait list or transferring it when they sell their boat to another individual.
Yep, because for a 90-foot boat, we're talking in excess of $20,000.
Correct. But as you may know, when you buy the boat from me and I sell the boat to you, because you get the privilege of having that slip permit transferred to you, there's an inflated price in the boat well beyond that $20,000.
To cover that difference, passed on.
Yes.
I got it. As a realtor, I understand that very well. Okay.
I don't know if I know what.
Ding, 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 ding.
Yeah,
ding,
right. Finally, Maritime Museum. They're in negotiation for a whole new kind of relationship, are they not? Paying off, and then I can't remember exactly what it is, but.
Councilman Hotchkiss, a number of years ago, Council directed us to renegotiate the terms of the lease with the Maritime Museum, and we successfully did that. And the arrangement, without going into great detail, was that they can pay, I believe it's $1 million, in order to buy out the term of their lease, which was upwards to 40 years at that time. and we gave them a 5-year window in order to do that.
Right.
Their rent, I believe, is around 120 a year, 130 a year now. So every year that they've paid rent, that's come off of what would be the $1 million buyout figure. We anticipate they'll take the full 5 years in order to do that. So I believe that $340,000 number would be the residual payment on the $1 million. And at that point, there will be no more rent for the Maritime Museum for that facility.
Do you know how they're coming in their fundraising for that?
My understanding is that they've raised over $800,000 towards that goal. They want to get to $1.5 million, even though that's in excess of what they would need, because they would like some ongoing support beyond
Operating
just
funds, et cetera.
Correct. Correct.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. How big's the waiting list now? I remember when we changed the ordinance, there was someone from 1976 still on there, been waiting for that longer. But how are we doing with that?
We're down, Mick just indicated, we're in the 40s, so 40 people still on the wait list. As you know, we froze the wait list many years ago because of that same expectation. And we have gradually been assigning slips that we probably assign 4, 5, 6 a year off of the wait list, depending upon what Mick just told me today. We got another 20 back today, a 20-foot slip. It's typically been in the smaller size slips, but I'm sure there may still be a few people on that wait list that have been there many, many years.